Okay, hello Cloud Gurus, and welcome to the very last hands-on lecture in the VPC section of the course. We're going to learn all about VPC endpoints, and in the next lecture we're going to go in and summarize everything that we've learned about VPCs. So here is the age-old question: what is a VPC endpoint? So VPC endpoint enables you to privately connect your VPC to supported AWS services and VPC endpoint services powered by private link without requiring an internet gateway, a NAT device, a VPN connection, or an AWS Direct Connect connection. Instances in your VPC do not require public IP addresses to communicate with resources in the service. So traffic between your VPC and other services does not leave the Amazon network. So it's a way of traversing your traffic without having to leave the Amazon network. You don't need to go over the internet. Endpoints are virtual devices, and they are horizontally scaled, redundant, and highly available VPC components that allow communication between instances in your VPC and services without imposing availability risk or bandwidth constraints on your network traffic. And there's basically two types of VPC endpoints. We have our interface endpoints and we have our gateway endpoints. And in this lab, what we're going to do is we're going to create an S3 gateway endpoint. We'll have a look at how we're going to do that a bit later. At first, we should just talk about an interface endpoint. So this is an elastic network interface, or an ENI, with a private IP address that serves as an entry point for traffic destined to a supported service. So the following services are supported. I'm not going to read them all, but basically a whole bunch of services are supported, and there's probably going to be more and more added throughout 2019 and 2020. Again, don't worry, you're never going to be quizzed on this as to which services are supported, but what you need to know is you basically attach an ENI to an EC2 instance, and that will essentially allow you to communicate to these services using the Amazon internal network. They don't need to then traverse the internet. And then gateway endpoints are very similar. They look just like NAT gateways essentially, and they're supported for S3 and DynamoDB currently. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create a gateway endpoint. So right now, this is what our VPC environment looks like. We've got an EC2 instance in a private subnet. We've got one in a public subnet. Our private subnet, when it wants to communicate to S3, it basically traverses through the NAT gateway and then it goes outside of the AWS network, and then it uses basically the S3 public endpoints, and that is how it would copy a file. What we're going to do is we're going to change this architecture. We're going to get our instance to send our files to a VPC gateway, and then that gateway is then going to send that file to our S3 bucket, and it will not leave the Amazon network. So let's go ahead and see how we can set this up. You will need to log into the AWS console. If we go over to services, we'll just go down to identity access management and security and compliance. And I want you just to make sure that you've got a role which allows you to talk to S3. Now, for some reason, I must have deleted it at some point. I'm going to go ahead and create the role. See if you can create it yourself from memory. So I'm going to use the EC2 service. I'm going to go ahead and go next. And then I'm going to go for Then I'm going to type S3 in here. So I want S3 full access, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit next. Tags I don't really need, and then I'm going to call this S3 admin access. This will allow EC2 to call S3 on my behalf. I'm going to go ahead and create the role. So I've now created that role. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go over to EC2, and we're going to add this role to our instance that's in our private subnet. So we're going to do it to my DB server, and we're just going to go over and go to instance settings and change the attach replace IAM role. And then I'm just going to add in S3 in there, and I'm going to go ahead and hit apply. So that has now applied it. Now I do have a couple of network ACLs, network access control lists, and it can be difficult to manage. So what I'm just going to quickly do is just go down to my network ACLs. So I need to find my VPC, and then I'm going to go over to my network ACLs, and I'm just going to quickly move my subnet to my default network ACL. So we've got this web network ACL. I'm going to click on my default subnet. So this is my main or default subnet for this VPC. I'm going to go to my subnet associations, and I'm going to edit this, and I'm going to go ahead and add this subnet into it as well. I'm going to go ahead and click edit. So now it's I've only got one subnet that I have to worry about. I don't have to worry about all my different inbound and outbound rules. So I'm just doing that to make this lab a little bit easier. So now that we've done that, what we're going to do is we're going to SSH into the EC2 instance that's in our private subnet, and I'm going to go ahead and try and create a file and just copy it to an S3 bucket. So let's go ahead and grab the IP address. So I need to SSH into my public one, and then I'm going to SSH from my public one over to my private one. So I'm just going to grab this IP address there. And see if you can remember, mine just ends in .235. Okay, so here I am. I'm in my downloads directory. I'm going to SSH EC2 and then -user and then @ I'm copying and pasting my my public IP address in there. And then I'm going to use my key pair. And so there we go. I've connected. I'm going to elevate my privileges to root. And I'm going to go ahead and clear this screen. Now I should still have my private key in here, which I do from a few lectures ago. And then I'm going to SSH using EC2 -user and then @ and then I'm going to do my private IP address, so 10.0.2 and then I think it was .235. Your private IP address will be different, so make sure you remember what it is. And then I'm going to do my private key pair.pem, and there we go. Going to elevate my privileges to root. I'm going to clear the screen. Then I'm just going to type AWS-S3LS, and I should be able to list all my buckets in there, and you can see that I can do that. And what I could do is I could create a file, so I could just say, let's say echo, and then test dot, we'll just say test, and I'm going to output that to test.txt. And again, if I hit ls, we can see that that file has been created. And then I could do AWS S3, and then copy, and then test.txt. And then I want to do that to my bucket, and I'm going to do it to the A Cloud Guru. And then it's 2019, and then it's Ryan, and then Kronenberg, and then it's Pi 3.141. And that has now copied it over to my S3 bucket. And just to test that that worked, let's go over to S3 and see that we can see that file. So it's in here, and there we go, test.txt has just been placed in there. So the next thing we're going to do is we could go in and just delete our NAT gateway, or what we could actually do is just remove the root, and that's essentially the same as deleting it because it's got no root to our NAT gateway. So I'm just going to go over to my root table, and what I want to do is I want to grab my main root table and click in here, and you can see here we've got our root out to our NAT gateway. And what we want to do is we want to go in and hit edit root, and we're going to delete that. So essentially that is now saying we have no root out to our NAT gateway. If I go back over to my EC2 instance, so I'm back in that private EC2 instance, I'm going to go ahead and clear the screen just so it's easier to see. If I now type AWS S3LS, nothing's going to happen because it has no root out to the internet because we've deleted that from our main root table. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go in and add in our own VPC endpoint. So I'm back in the VPC dashboard. You'll be able to go over to endpoints, and we're going to go ahead and create an endpoint. And you can do these different service categories. So you can do it by service, you can find services by name or an AWS marketplace. And what you can do is if you just go down to type, you can see here that's DynamoDB. So that's the DynamoDB gateway. And I want this one. I want the Amazon S3 gateway. And then in here, it's asking me which VPC I'd like to do this for. I'm going to do it for my A Cloud Guru VPC. And then it's going to ask which root table you want to do it to. I'm going to do it to my main root table. So I'm going to click it in here. And the policy, we're going to do full access, and then we're just going to go ahead and hit create endpoint. And that has now created our VPC endpoint, and you can see that it's already available. Now, full disclosure, I went over and clicked on my root table, and when I clicked on my main root, I couldn't actually see the root in there. It took probably about 5 minutes for the root to go in and be set up automatically. So do just wait a little bit. The VPC endpoint's provisioned immediately, but the updating to the root table can take a little bit of time. As soon as you do see that root in there, feel free to go over to your EC2 instance. So I'm back in my EC2 instance. If I type in AWS S3LS, it just looks like it's going to time out, and it's actually just really annoying. I don't know why they do this, but we need to add in another flag now. So we need to say AWS S3LS, and then we need to specify the region that we're in. So I'm in US East 2 because I'm in the Ohio region. and then that will go ahead and list my buckets. So if you do type AWS S3LS and it's just hanging, it's not because you don't have a connection, it's just that you have to specify the region that you're in. So now I'm able to see all my buckets and I'm not leaving the AWS network. I'm doing it through my VPC endpoint. So onto my exam tips, just remember what a VPC endpoint is. It enables you to privately connect your VPC to supported AWS services, and there's an awful lot of them, and VPC endpoint services powered by Private Link without requiring an internet gateway, NAT device, VPN connection, or AWS Direct Connect connection. And just remember there's two types of VPC endpoints. There's interface endpoints and then there's gateway endpoints, and gateway endpoints are currently supported for S3 and DynamoDB. So that is it for this lecture, guys. You've done really, really well. We're at the end of the VPC section of the course. Hopefully you've learnt an awful lot. In the next lecture, we're just going to summarize everything that we've learnt, and then we're ready to move on to high availability. So if you've got the time, please join me in the next lecture. Thank you.